military record, no nursing license, no obituary. Not a single document proves that Margaret Ellen Reyes ever existed. Yet a 43-page diary bearing her name describes something extraordinary. 40 minutes holding the hand of a dying, gray-skinned entity inside a restricted Roswell hangar in July 1947. 4 fingers, no external ears, communication without words. The diary surfaced at a 1974 estate sale, changed hands privately, and by 2003, vanished completely. Everyone connected to it is now dead or silent. The question is whether Margaret Ellen Reyes was silenced, or whether she ever existed at all. The narrative begins in the high-pressure environment of July 1947 at Roswell Army Air Field. At the time, this active installation served as a cornerstone of the newly established Strategic Air Command. It was home to the elite 509th Bombardment Group, the only military unit in the world capable of delivering atomic weapons. Because of this specialized nuclear mission, every operations hangar, runway, and medical facility on the base remained under constant armed guard. It is within this heavily secured installation that modern accounts place Margaret Ellen Reyes. These unverified claims, which surfaced decades after the event, describe Reyes as a 29-year-old surgical nurse. According to these later testimonies, she was abruptly pulled from her routine duties at the base hospital and escorted into a restricted hangar. The narrative describes a quiet, isolated bedside experience, rather than a large military recovery operation. Inside the hangar, away from the main recovery efforts, Reyes allegedly held the hand of a dying, non-human entity for 40 minutes. The story presents this encounter as a private, silent bedside vigil, focused entirely on a single medical professional and a dying, unclassified being. But the documented history of the airfield presents a different reality. The morning reports and personnel logs for the base's medical squadron during early July 1947 survive in public archives. These records detail routine base injuries, shift assignments, and standard patient care, but they show no entry for a nurse named Margaret Ellen Reyes. While the strategic importance and intense security of the 509th Bombardment Group are historical facts, the 40-minute hangar encounter remains an unverified claim, documented only in later retellings, rather than the official military record. According to these later accounts, the immediate aftermath of the hangar encounter introduced another, unverified claim. Shortly after allegedly putting her experience into writing, the nurse was reportedly transferred away from Roswell Army Air Field. This reassignment is described in secondary narratives as sudden and permanent, leaving no forwarding address, transfer record, or reachable destination in any known military archive. However, the source material for this account does not supply a specific transfer order, a unit designation, or the name of any receiving facility. No official travel vouchers, military police escorts, or administrative squadron logs have surfaced to document where she went or when she departed. Without these standard military records, the claim of a sudden transfer cannot be verified. It remains an open historical question whether this alleged witness remained institutionally findable after July 1947, or if the entire sequence belongs to modern legend. This administrative gap shifts the investigation away from the base personnel files and toward the physical items that supposedly survived the decades, beginning with the primary piece of evidence that brought this story to light. In 1974, an estate sale in Albuquerque, New Mexico, served as the setting for the first reported appearance of the physical diary. Later accounts state that a buyer discovered a leather-bound, 43-page notebook resting inside a cardboard box. According to these testimonies, the handwritten text belonged to Margaret Ellen Reyes and contained her immediate reactions to the events of July 1947. This origin story has been repeated throughout subsequent retellings, yet it remains entirely separate from any documented historical record. No independent probate documents, estate sale catalogs, or official bills of sale have ever been produced to confirm that the transaction took place or that the items belong to a former military nurse. This represents a 27-year provenance gap between the alleged date of the diary's composition in 1947 and its sudden public appearance in 1974. The narrative claims the original document was eventually passed to a researcher named Philip Oates, who reportedly made photographic copies of the pages. However, Oates exists solely within the confines of these unverified accounts. A search of scholarly databases, institutional libraries, and professional archives yields no record of any academic affiliation, published papers, or expert reports bearing his name. Without verifiable documentation of the estate sale or the individuals involved, the discovery story remains classified as an unverified claim. The 43 pages of the handwritten notebook contain specific passages detailing the physical form of the recovered entity, reportedly beginning with a timestamp of approximately 2 o'clock in the morning on July 8, 1947. According to these unverified diary entries, written in ink described as the color of dried blood on the inside cover, the being possessed smooth, ash-gray skin and hands that ended in only 4 elongated fingers. The text also notes a complete absence of external ears, describing instead smooth, unbroken skin where auditory structures would normally exist on a human skull. Rather than spoken language, the author describes a form of silent mental communication, where thoughts, emotions, and concepts were projected directly into her mind during the 40-minute hangar encounter. This non-verbal transmission reportedly bypassed any need for vocal cords or physical hearing, conveying an intense sense of distress from the dying being. These detailed descriptions frequently appear in modern online videos, where creators present the passages as verified history. Yet, no independent scientific body, museum, or military archivist has ever authenticated these pages. While secondary accounts assert that researcher Philip Oates captured the handwriting on 35mm film, those photographic slides have never been made available for public or academic analysis. This lack of verifiable visual evidence leaves researchers to rely on third-hand transcriptions rather than direct examination of the source material itself. Despite the dramatic claims in popular media surrounding the entity's final thoughts, no verified transcription of this mental message survives in any historical archive. The exact words or ideas supposedly shared with the nurse are lost, replaced by varying interpretations in modern lore. This leaves a significant gap between the popular narrative of a final message and the lack of physical proof to back it up, shifting the focus of the investigation from the reported contents of the pages to the questions of their true origin and custody. In historical research, the chain of custody determines the credibility of any artifact. For a document to serve as proof, scholars must trace a clear, unbroken path of possession from the moment of its creation to its arrival in the present day. Every hand that touched the manuscript, every closet where it was stored, and every transaction must be recorded. When this sequence of ownership breaks, the item loses its value as reliable evidence. To verify if a diary belongs to 1947, investigators rely on physical materials. Chemists test the paper fiber, identify watermarks, and analyze ink composition. For example, forensic testing on documents from this era can reveal if a writer used early post-war ballpoint ink or traditional fountain pen inks. But such tests require the physical manuscript. Without the original notebook, scientists cannot perform handwriting analysis to connect the script to Margaret Ellen Reyes or run tests on the leather binding to confirm its age. Even a single chemical discrepancy in the ink can expose a modern creation. Instead of the physical artifact, modern discussions rely on photographs, photocopies, transcriptions, and video quotes. In archival science, these are distinct evidentiary objects, each carrying different levels of reliability. A photocopy or a digital image can be altered, cropped, or entirely fabricated. They do not carry the chemical signature of the paper or the depth of the ink. Modern presentations often show stylized text or stock images of old paper, but these graphics do not display authenticated original pages. This distinction becomes critical when tracking what happened to the diary after the reported handoff to Philip Oates. The ownership changes following this exchange occurred entirely through private, undocumented transfers. No bills of sale, library receipts, or donor agreements exist to record who held the notebook or where it was stored. It remains unresolved whether any usable photographs or photocopies even survived these private handoffs. While some accounts mention 35mm slides, the preservation of photographic copies does not prove authorship or date. A photograph of a fake document is simply a real photo of a fabrication. Without the original paper to test, the trail of custody ends in a series of unrecorded handshakes. Searches of released Army Nurse Corps records do not locate Margaret Ellen Reyes or her reported name variant, Margaret Ellen Dodd. No matching entry exists in Roswell Army Air Field medical rosters or morning reports from July 1947. Civilian databases also lack linked nursing licenses, graduation rolls, obituaries, or confirmed death records under either name. Within the verified documentary record, she is entirely absent. Supporters instead point to the unverified claim that military officers transferred Reyes to an unknown station and purged her files. Archivists testing this assertion must consider the 1973 National Personnel Records Center fire, which destroyed 80% of Army files from this era. But a folder lost to an accidental fire remains distinct from a file subjected to deliberate redaction. No classification markings, purge orders, or destruction receipts tied to Reyes have ever been identified. The missing paperwork leaves deliberate erasure, non-existence, and ordinary archival loss as competing explanations without proving a cover-up. A separate, unverified claim asserts that 14 medical staff members across the Southwest were systematically removed from duty in 1949 because of their proximity to the Roswell incident. However, official military records point to a broader administrative event. In July 1949, the military formally established the Air Force Nurse Corps, a massive reorganization that transferred between 1,197 and 1,199 Army nurses to the newly independent service branch. This nationwide restructuring naturally caused localized transfers and reassignments throughout southwestern bases, which can easily be misread as a targeted purge. No primary list, personnel files, or hospital rosters identify these 14 individuals, nor do any contemporary records link their duty changes to Roswell. Furthermore, some variations of the story place these events within civilian medical institutions rather than military installations, complicating the distinction between standard career transfers, ordinary discharges, and deliberate removals. Without archival evidence, the alleged silencing of Southwest medical personnel remains an unverified claim, overshadowed by the documented reality of a massive post-war military reorganization. The year 2003 marks the exact point where any verifiable chain of custody for the manuscript permanently breaks. According to modern accounts, the original diary disappeared that year, rendering the physical artifact completely inaccessible. Those reported to have handled the notebook over the decades are either deceased, unidentified, or silent, leaving the identity of the last custodian with direct access to the document entirely unresolved. Furthermore, no official records exist to document this sudden loss. An exhaustive search of civil archives reveals no police reports, insurance claims, or court filings filed by any owner to report the theft or disappearance of the manuscript. Without a physical document, investigators have no access to a publicly available original, an authenticated high-resolution scan, or a complete verified transcription for scholarly review. This total absence of physical evidence halts any scientific investigation. Without the original pages, forensic experts cannot perform handwriting comparison, ink dating chemistry, or paper and watermark analysis, tests that could easily distinguish a genuine 1947 document from a modern fabrication. While proponents of the story often interpret this sudden disappearance as evidence of a coordinated cover-up, the reported loss of the diary does not serve as independent proof of a military seizure. In the absence of documented receipts or confiscation orders, the disappearance of the manuscript remains an unverified event, leaving the story balanced on the edge of modern folklore. A modern construction or a hoax created after 1974 represents the explanation most consistent with the lack of tangible evidence. Yet, other possibilities exist, such as a composite story that gradually fused unrelated military departures with emerging Roswell folklore. This narrative model closely mirrors Glenn Dennis's earlier accounts of an unnamed nurse, blending his mid-century anecdotes with the gray alien imagery that only gained popularity decades later. Compounding this difficulty are the unresolved contradictions surrounding the document itself. One analysis cites a chemical test indicating the ink contained a pigment first manufactured in 1974, while counter-arguments emphasize that no independent forensic examination of the original diary has ever been published. Without the actual notebook, researchers cannot analyze the paper fibers or establish a clear provenance. To transition this account from legend to historical fact would require concrete, traceable evidence, a verified author, contemporaneous military records, an authentic physical artifact, or independent witnesses. Repeated online videos merely rebroadcast the same narrative, offering no new confirmation of its core claims. Ultimately, Margaret Ellen Reyes remains at the center of this mystery, not as a verified historical figure, but as an empathetic symbol of a quiet, bedside vigil in a cold hangar. The unresolved question remains whether this surviving, unverified account in the missing evidence can establish anything concrete about the Roswell incident, or if they simply represent another layer of an enduring American myth. Today, the boundary between history and folklore grows increasingly thin. The real mystery is no longer what happened in that hangar, but why we yearn so deeply to believe it. Until tangible proof emerges from the archives, we are left chasing shadows in an endless maze of myth. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below.